In this video, we'll break down Carl Jung's discovery about the people who seem to understand others best. It wasn't luck, charm, or even natural empathy. Jung found they all shared one hidden psychological pattern, a pattern so powerful that once you see it, you can read someone's true character in ways most people never notice. Picture this moment. You're talking to someone about a struggle you're facing, maybe a relationship issue or a career decision. Most people offer generic advice or try to fix your problem. But then you meet someone different. They don't just listen to your words. They seem to see straight through to the heart of what you're really experiencing. They understand not just what you're going through, but why it matters to you so deeply. Jung spent decades studying what made certain people natural healers, therapists, and guides. What he discovered challenges everything we think we know about wisdom and insight. The people who understand human suffering best aren't those who've avoided pain. They're those who've walked through their own darkness and emerged with something precious, the ability to transform personal wounds into universal wisdom. Jung called this archetype the wounded healer. But here's what most people miss about Jung's discovery. Being wounded alone doesn't make someone a healer. Plenty of people carry deep pain without developing insight or compassion. The wounded healer represents something far more specific, someone who has consciously worked with their own suffering until it became a source of strength rather than weakness. And by the end of this journey, you'll not only recognize wounded healers in your life, but you'll understand how your own struggles might be preparing you to help others in ways you never imagined. But here's what makes Jung's wounded healer archetype so powerful and so unsettling. It suggests that our deepest pain might actually be our greatest gift. Jung wrote, "The wounded healer is a powerful archetype that teaches us that what we perceive as our greatest weakness can become our greatest strength." This idea forces us to completely reframe our relationship with suffering. Most people spend enormous energy trying to avoid pain, hide their struggles, or pretend their wounds don't exist. But Jung discovered that this avoidance actually prevents us from accessing our deepest capacity for wisdom and connection. The wounded healer understands that healing doesn't mean eliminating pain. It means transforming pain into purpose. Jung's wounded healer reveals itself through two specific psychological patterns that operate as reliable indicators of someone's capacity for deep understanding and authentic healing. Jung's first wounded healer indicator is what I call resonant recognition, the ability to immediately recognize and understand suffering in others because you've encountered similar darkness in yourself. This isn't about having identical experiences. It's about having developed what Jung called feeling into the universal patterns of human struggle. When someone has truly worked with their own wounds, they develop an almost supernatural ability to sense what others are really going through beneath their surface presentation. They can hear the loneliness behind someone's anger, the fear behind someone's perfectionism, the grief behind someone's numbness. Let me show you how this works. Meet Elena, a therapist who struggled with severe anxiety for years. She tried everything: medication, therapy, meditation, lifestyle changes. Nothing seemed to provide lasting relief. But through this journey, Elena developed an intimate understanding of what anxiety actually feels like from the inside. Years later, when clients come to Elena describing their anxiety, something remarkable happens. She doesn't just understand their symptoms intellectually. She recognizes the quality of their experience, the specific way anxiety hijacks thinking, the exhaustion of constant vigilance, the shame of feeling broken. But here's what makes Elena a wounded healer, rather than just someone who's experienced anxiety. She's done the conscious work of understanding her own patterns, triggers, and healing process. She can differentiate between her experience and her client's experience, while using her hard-won wisdom to guide them. Jung wrote, "Only a wounded person can heal, but the wound must become conscious." Elena's wound became conscious through years of self-examination, therapy, and integration work. This consciousness allows her to use her experience as a resource rather than a burden. This resonant recognition shows up in subtle ways. Wounded healers often know what questions to ask because they remember what they needed to explore. They recognize defense mechanisms because they've used those same strategies. They can sense when someone is ready for deeper work because they remember their own readiness signals. If you've ever felt immediately understood by someone in a way that felt almost magical, comment, "I felt truly seen." You were likely encountering a wounded healer's resonant recognition. But resonant recognition goes deeper than professional helping relationships. It shows up in friendships, parenting, leadership, and everyday interactions. The person who knows exactly what to say when you're going through a divorce might have navigated their own relationship trauma. The friend who understands your career crisis without judgment might have faced their own professional identity struggles. Jung discovered that we can only truly accompany others through territories we've explored ourselves. This doesn't mean we need identical experiences, but we need to have faced similar psychological challenges: loss, fear, shame, confusion, or despair. Jung's second wounded healer indicator is what I call integrated vulnerability, the ability to be open about one's struggles and scars without being consumed or defined by them. This represents a crucial distinction between someone who is simply wounded and someone who has become a wounded healer. Many people who've experienced significant pain remain stuck in victim consciousness, defining themselves primarily by what happened to them. Others swing to the opposite extreme, completely disconnecting from their wounds and pretending they've moved beyond them entirely. The wounded healer occupies a different space, able to acknowledge and discuss their struggles while maintaining psychological stability and forward momentum. Jung wrote, "The wounded healer teaches us that healing happens not by forgetting our wounds, but by finding meaning in them." Integrated vulnerability means you can talk about your struggles without being re-traumatized, without seeking sympathy, and without losing your center. Let me illustrate this with Marcus's story. Marcus grew up with an alcoholic father and spent his 20s in his own struggle with addiction. After getting sober, Marcus could have chosen several paths. He could have buried his past, pretending it never happened. He could have become defined by his recovery, making it the center of every conversation. Or he could have remained stuck in anger and resentment about his childhood. Instead, Marcus developed integrated vulnerability. He can discuss his experiences with addiction and family dysfunction when it's relevant and helpful. He doesn't hide his past, but he doesn't lead with it either. His wounds have become wisdom without becoming his identity. When Marcus encounters someone struggling with addiction, his integrated vulnerability allows him to offer something unique. He can share relevant aspects of his experience without making it about himself. He can provide hope based on lived experience while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Jung observed that people with integrated vulnerability possess several distinctive characteristics. They can hold space for others' pain without absorbing it or trying to fix it immediately. They understand that healing is a process rather than a destination. They can sit with difficult emotions without needing to change or escape them. Most importantly, they've developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in creative tension. They can be wounded and whole, vulnerable and strong, scarred and beautiful simultaneously. This integration doesn't happen automatically. Jung wrote, "Integration is not a goal, but a way of life." It requires ongoing conscious work to transform wounds into wisdom while avoiding both denial and identification with victimhood. Watch for people who can discuss difficult experiences with presence rather than reactivity. They neither minimize their struggles nor dramatize them. They speak from a place of hard-won understanding rather than fresh pain or defensive armor. If you've learned to talk about your struggles as part of your growth story rather than your identity, comment, "My wounds became my wisdom." This transformation marks the transition from wounded to wounded healer. Now that you understand Jung's two wounded healer indicators, let's explore the psychological mechanisms that make this archetype so powerful for understanding human nature. Jung spent his career studying what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that connect all human experience. He discovered that certain archetypal figures appear across cultures and throughout history, representing universal aspects of human development. The wounded healer appears in mythology, religion, and folklore worldwide. From the Greek myth of Chiron, the centaur who could heal others but not himself, to shamanic traditions where healers must journey through spiritual death and rebirth, to religious figures who transform suffering into service. Jung wrote, "The archetype of the wounded healer is constellated when someone's personal wound connects them to the universal experience of human suffering. This connection creates profound empathy and insight, because the individual's personal healing becomes a microcosm of collective healing. The reason resonant recognition works so reliably is because emotional pain follows universal patterns. While the specific circumstances vary, the psychological experience of loss, trauma, fear, or shame contains recognizable elements. Someone who has consciously navigated these inner territories develops a map that can guide others through similar landscapes." Jung discovered that the unconscious mind operates through symbolic language and archetypal patterns rather than literal facts. When a wounded healer encounters someone in distress, their unconscious recognizes familiar patterns and can respond with appropriate guidance and support. This is why wounded healers often know things they shouldn't technically know. They recognize the stages of grief, the patterns of trauma recovery, the cycles of addiction, or the progression of spiritual awakening because they've lived through these processes consciously. The second indicator, integrated vulnerability, works because it demonstrates psychological wholeness. Jung wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." Someone who can acknowledge their wounds without being defined by them shows they've achieved a level of individuation that allows them to help others without losing themselves. This integration creates what Jung called a temenos, a safe psychological space where healing can occur. When someone feels genuinely accepted in their brokenness by someone who has integrated their own brokenness, profound healing becomes possible. Comment if you've experienced healing in the presence of someone who understood your struggle from their own experience. Wounded healers create healing spaces. The wounded healer archetype reveals why traditional approaches to helping professions often fall short. Technical knowledge and professional training, while valuable, cannot substitute for the lived experience of working with one's own psychological material. Jung wrote, "The patient does not feel himself accepted unless the very wound that hurts him is taken seriously by the physician." This acceptance can only come from someone who has taken their own wounds seriously enough to transform them into resources for understanding and healing. Beyond Jung's two primary indicators, there's a deeper pattern that emerges in fully developed wounded healers. What I call the alchemy of service, the ability to transform personal suffering into offerings that serve collective healing. This represents the highest expression of the wounded healer archetype. It's not enough to heal one's own wounds, or even to help others heal theirs. The mature wounded healer begins to see their personal healing journey as part of a larger pattern of consciousness evolution. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, but the responsibility of a lifetime is using who you are in service of something greater than yourself." The wounded healer's ultimate purpose isn't personal healing. It's contributing to the healing of human consciousness itself. This alchemical process follows specific stages that Jung identified through his study of both individual development and collective transformation. Stage 1 is the initial wounding. Something happens that cracks open the individual's normal way of being in the world. This could be trauma, loss, illness, addiction, mental health struggles, or any experience that forces someone to confront the deeper questions of existence. Stage 2 is the dark night of the soul. The individual must navigate through confusion, despair, anger, or fear without clear guidance or guaranteed outcomes. This stage tests their commitment to growth and their willingness to face uncomfortable truths about themselves and reality. Stage 3 is the turning point. Something shifts in the individual's relationship to their suffering. They begin to see it as meaningful rather than merely painful, as potentially transformative rather than simply destructive. Stage 4 is the integration work. The individual consciously processes their experience, often with the help of therapy, spiritual practice, or other healing modalities. They develop understanding of their patterns, triggers, and healing process. Stage 5 is the emergence of wisdom. The individual begins to see how their specific struggle connects to universal human themes. Their personal healing becomes a template for understanding others' healing journeys. Stage 6 is the alchemical transformation. The individual discovers ways to transform their wound into a gift that serves others. This might manifest as becoming a therapist, teacher, artist, leader, or simply as being someone who creates healing spaces in their daily interactions. Let me show you this alchemy in action through Sarah's journey. Sarah experienced severe depression in her early 30s following a series of losses. Her father's death, the end of her marriage, and the loss of her job. For 2 years she struggled with suicidal thoughts, isolation, and a complete loss of meaning. But Sarah made a crucial choice. Instead of just trying to get back to normal, she decided to understand her depression as deeply as possible. She worked with therapists, explored spiritual practices, and began to see her breakdown as a breakthrough waiting to happen. Through this process, Sarah discovered that her depression wasn't just personal pathology. It was partly a response to collective disconnection, meaninglessness, and spiritual poverty in modern life. Her individual healing became connected to larger questions about how to create meaning in an uncertain world. Today, Sarah leads workshops on finding purpose after profound loss. Her depression became the foundation for helping others navigate their own dark nights of the soul. She transformed her deepest wound into her greatest offering. Jung wrote, "Out of every psychological crisis comes an opportunity for renewal." The wounded healer represents individuals who consciously embrace this opportunity and then help others recognize the same potential in their struggles. This alchemical process doesn't minimize the reality of pain or suggest that all suffering serves a purpose. Some wounds are purely destructive, and not everyone chooses or is able to transform their pain into service. But for those who do undergo this transformation, their contribution to collective healing becomes immeasurable. The wounded healer's alchemy creates ripple effects that extend far beyond their direct interactions. They model possibility for others who are struggling. They demonstrate that growth and meaning can emerge from even the most difficult circumstances. They contribute to cultural narratives that honor struggle as potentially sacred rather than simply pathological. If you've found ways to transform your struggles into gifts for others, comment, "My pain became my purpose." This transformation represents one of the highest expressions of human potential. Now that you understand the wounded healer archetype, let's explore how to recognize and cultivate these qualities in yourself and others, while avoiding the shadow aspects that can distort this powerful pattern. But first, a crucial warning. Jung understood that every archetype has both light and shadow expressions. The wounded healer, when unconscious or distorted, can become what I call the wounded wounder. Someone who uses their pain to justify harming others, or who becomes addicted to helper roles to avoid facing their own unresolved issues. Jung wrote, "The healer, who has not healed himself, wounds others." Here are the warning signs that someone is operating from wounded wounder consciousness, rather than authentic wounded healer awareness. They use their story to manipulate or control others. If someone consistently leverages their struggles to gain sympathy, avoid responsibility, or dominate conversations. They haven't transformed their wounds into wisdom. They become addicted to helping others while neglecting their own continued growth. Some people use service to others as a way to avoid dealing with their own ongoing psychological work. They lack appropriate boundaries between their experience and others' experiences. If someone can't differentiate between their healing process and their clients' or friends' healing processes, they're likely projecting unresolved material. They develop a superiority complex about their struggles. If someone believes their particular form of suffering makes them more enlightened or qualified than others, they've become identified with the wounded healer role rather than embodying its wisdom. They become rescuers rather than empowerers. Authentic wounded healers help others develop their own healing capacities. Wounded wounders create dependency by trying to save or fix others. Jung wrote, "The wounded healer is not someone who has overcome their wounds, but someone who has learned to dance with them consciously." This dancing requires ongoing self-awareness, humility, and commitment to personal growth. The shadow of the wounded healer also includes what Jung called inflation, the unconscious identification with archetypal energy. Someone might begin to believe they are the wounded healer rather than understanding that they're temporarily embodying this archetypal pattern. This inflation leads to grandiosity, loss of personal boundaries, and eventual burnout. Jung warned, when we identify with an archetype, we lose our individual humanity and become possessed by forces we don't understand. The antidote to these shadow aspects is what Jung called conscious relationship to the archetype. This means recognizing when you're embodying wounded healer energy while maintaining awareness of your own humanity, limitations, and ongoing need for growth and support. Here's how to cultivate authentic wounded healer consciousness. First, continue your own healing work even as you help others. Jung wrote, "The physician must be affected by the patient's illness, or healing cannot take place." But being affected doesn't mean taking on the patient's illness. It means staying connected to your own ongoing healing process. Develop discernment about when and how to share your story. Authentic wounded healers share their experience when it serves the other person's healing, not to process their own emotions or gain sympathy. Maintain appropriate boundaries between your wounds and others' wounds. Your experience can inform your understanding of others' struggles without becoming conflated with them. Cultivate multiple sources of identity beyond your wounds and your helping role. Jung emphasized the importance of a well-rounded life that includes play, creativity, relationships, and interests unrelated to helping others. Stay curious rather than becoming an expert. The moment you think you've figured out healing or human nature, you've lost the beginner's mind that allows for continued learning and growth. Practice what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. You can be wounded and healing, helper and helped, wise and learning simultaneously. In relationships, look for people who embody healthy wounded healer qualities. They're comfortable with their own imperfections while also being capable of growth. They can offer support without creating dependence. They share vulnerably without dumping emotionally. In professional settings, wounded healers often make exceptional leaders, counselors, and mentors because they understand human struggle from the inside. But watch for those who've done the integration work rather than those who are still identified with their victim stories. For parents, understanding the wounded healer archetype is crucial. Children often need to see that adults can face difficulties and emerge stronger, but they need to see conscious processing of struggles rather than unconscious acting out of unhealed wounds. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Wounded healers have done enough self-acceptance work to help others on their own journeys toward wholeness. But remember, you don't need to wait until you're completely healed to begin helping others. Jung understood that healing is an ongoing process. The key is consciousness about where you are in your own journey and appropriate humility about what you can offer. Comment if you're ready to explore how your own struggles might become gifts for others. I'm open to alchemical transformation. The most profound aspect of Jung's wounded healer archetype is what I call the interconnectedness revelation. The moment when you realize that your personal healing journey is inseparably connected to the healing of others and the collective consciousness itself. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The wounded healer embodies this principle most clearly. Every healing interaction creates transformation in both directions. This interconnectedness operates on multiple levels. First, the wounded healer's personal healing creates permission for others to begin their own healing journeys. When someone sees that profound struggles can be transformed into wisdom and service, it changes their relationship to their own difficulties. Second, the act of helping others heal continues the wounded healer's own healing process. Jung discovered that we often need to give away what we most need to receive. By offering others the understanding, acceptance, and guidance they needed during their own dark times, wounded healers continue to heal their own wounds. Third, the wounded healer contributes to what Jung called the collective unconscious by adding their individual healing wisdom to the shared pool of human understanding. Each person who transforms suffering into service creates templates that others can follow. This interconnectedness explains why wounded healers often report that their most difficult experiences now feel like gifts, not because the pain wasn't real or because they're glad it happened, but because they can see how their struggle prepared them to offer something unique to the world. Let me share how this interconnectedness played out in my own understanding. I worked with someone whose childhood trauma had created severe trust issues in relationships. Through years of therapy and personal work, they developed extraordinary skill at recognizing trust patterns and helping others navigate relationship challenges. But here's what made this person a true wounded healer. They didn't just heal themselves and then help others. The process of helping others continued to deepen their own understanding of trust, intimacy, and healing. Each person they worked with taught them something new about their own journey. Jung wrote, "Healing is a matter of time, but it is sometimes also a matter of opportunity." Wounded healers create opportunities for healing to occur, both for others and for themselves. This interconnectedness also explains why wounded healers often feel called to their work rather than simply choosing it. Jung believed that sometimes our wounds choose our vocation as much as we choose our path. The healing journey naturally leads to wanting to help others on similar journeys. The interconnectedness revelation transforms how wounded healers see their past struggles. Instead of experiences to overcome or forget, they become sacred material that connects them to universal human themes and allows them to serve collective healing. But this interconnectedness comes with responsibility. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Wounded healers must remain vigilant about their own projections, triggers, and unhealed areas while helping others. The ultimate expression of the wounded healer archetype is what Jung called individuation in service. This means becoming fully yourself not for selfish reasons, but because your authentic self has unique gifts to offer the world. Your wounds, properly integrated, become part of your offering. As you develop wounded healer consciousness, you begin to see everyone's struggles as potentially sacred, not in the sense that suffering is good, but in the sense that every human being carries the potential to transform their difficulties into wisdom and service. Jung understood that wounded healers aren't special people who've been chosen for some higher purpose. They're ordinary individuals who've made extraordinary choices about how to relate to their struggles. They've chosen consciousness over unconsciousness, integration over avoidance, service over self-pity. This choice is available to anyone who's experienced significant challenges. The question isn't whether you've been wounded. Everyone has. The question is whether you're willing to do the conscious work of transforming those wounds into resources for understanding, compassion, and service. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." But for the wounded healer, being who you are includes integrating your struggles so completely that they become sources of strength rather than weakness, wisdom rather than limitation, service rather than burden. The wounded healer represents one of humanity's most powerful archetypes because it demonstrates that no experience, no matter how difficult, is wasted if we're willing to work with it consciously. It shows that our greatest struggles can become our greatest gifts, not through denial or spiritualization, but through honest integration and generous service. When you embody wounded healer consciousness, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing your past struggles as things that happened to you and start seeing them as experiences that prepared you to serve. You realize that your healing journey wasn't just personal. It was preparation for contributing to collective healing. Jung's wounded healer archetype isn't just about individual healing or even helping others heal. It's about recognizing that personal transformation and collective transformation are inseparably linked. Every person who chooses to transform their wounds into wisdom contributes to the evolution of human consciousness itself. The two things Jung identified, resonant recognition and integrated vulnerability, aren't just signs of wounded healers. They're qualities that any of us can develop as we work consciously with our own struggles and learn to transform personal pain into universal wisdom. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." The wounded healer represents someone who has looked deeply into their own heart, found both darkness and light, and chosen to use that complete vision in service of others' awakening. So watch for the resonant recognition in yourself and others. Notice the integrated vulnerability that allows for authentic sharing without emotional dumping. But most importantly, consider how your own struggles might be preparing you to offer something unique to the world. Your wounds aren't flaws to hide or problems to solve. They might be the raw material for your greatest contribution to human understanding and collective healing. The question isn't whether you've been wounded, it's whether you're willing to become a wounded healer. If you want to explore more about how archetypal patterns shape our relationships and personal development, check out my video on The Four Jungian, Archetypes that Reveal Your True Purpose, where we dive deeper into Jung's insights about how universal patterns guide individual growth and service. Your journey toward becoming a wounded healer starts with seeing your struggles as potentially sacred material. It ends with transforming your deepest pain into your greatest gift to the world. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.